years we reached out to fix the goal. We said it costs $1 billion, but we didn't know how to do it. And then we've been thinking together about this for some time. And I think we are ready to just do it. It just takes us our intelligence. And this is related to the digital revolution that is right now going on. So what's happening now is basically that computational power is increasing so much that it's actually going to extend beyond human intelligence in about 10, 15, or 20 years. And in fact, we're on the way, so it already happened. The best chess players can't compete with computers anymore. And also, we have these gaming competitions on TV where now IBM Watson is better than the best players, and IBM therefore has decided to invest $1 billion into this system. It's already being used for customer hotlines and seems to be doing a good job, maybe better than humans can do. And we also know that about 70% of all financial transactions are now done by computers. So it's pretty clear that this is going to change the world, our economy, our society, and I anticipate that many institutions, all of them, will change fundamentally and dramatically within a very short time period. And we need to prepare ourselves for this and turn it to our advantage. So far, however, there are side effects that we need to take care of. So we've networked the world. We're doing that all the time, and unfortunately, this very network infrastructure that creates new services and functionality also creates highways for disaster spreading. And so we need to take care of this in terms of coming up with better systems design. Of course, a local perturbation can mess up the entire world, given that we now have global networks. This is not just a theoretical possibility. We have to consider that everything which is possible with a certain finite probability will finally happen sooner or later. So we really need to make sure that our networks are well designed, including engineered breaking points, so these kinds of cascading effects can happen. Unfortunately, so far, we're not in that situation. So we see these kinds of blackouts of power grids that reach all over Europe or North America. And we're also seeing a global financial crisis. And I'm showing you here this wonderful movie by Franz Schweitzer, really in the fog team, that shows how a single bankruptcy, in this case Lehman Brothers, can mess up the entire banking system, with hundreds of banks going bankrupt in the end, and losses of hundreds of millions of dollars. So we need to do a better job, and it's basically our job to give that advice, because we are the scientists who have the knowledge. And in fact, Andy Helbing from the Bank of England has pointed this out, that it's basically this increased intensity of interaction in the banking network that has created this vulnerability to perturbations. Things got worse, as we know, through complex interdependencies. We have networks of networks now, and the World Economic Forum has looked at that, at these interdependencies between different parts of our globalized system. It turns out there are kind of hyper risks that come up through these strong interdependencies, and it also turns out that now social and economic risks are the biggest risks that we're facing. So there's a new kind of challenge that comes from systemic instability and not from outer space or from external threats. These are system-immanent threats that result from wrong design. And here's just one example of the causalities that are in the system, in this case in the financial system. So we're looking at what created the financial meltdown, basically. And so there are these kind of circular dependencies that finally lets the system get out of control. Talking about eigenvalues, so basically here are these unstable eigenvalues, and I'm afraid that we're again brewing the perfect storm because we haven't still created the financial system as it should be. Moreover, of course, we're confronted with much more data. Within just a year, we're producing as much data as in 2,000 years of human history, and we have more speed. And that comes also with side effects. So, for example, that crash on May 6, 2010, which evaporated $600 billion within just 20 minutes. So that would have crashed the whole financial system had that happened just at another time. On the other hand, big data and these computer-powered technologies are creating absolutely new opportunities for us. And so the question is, how can we use that to fix the world? And should we do that in a top-down or in a bottom-up way? That's kind of the crucial question, and our governments are thinking about this as well. And there is kind of this perspective of getting into a situation where we will eventually know everything. The question is, who is we? Yeah? But so the idea of some people is that, in principle, we could use all this information to take just the perfect decision. So could we have something like a wise king or a benevolent dictator that takes all this information to figure out the optimal decision and just do it? And I think this is something which is behind some of the discussion that we're reading on the newspapers every day. And so we need to reflect about this kind of thinking and whether that has substance or not. Of course, knowing is not enough to fix the world. You have to be able to change it. And in fact, it would be possible to, theoretically at least, manipulate people's choices by personalized information and recommendations. And maybe it's already happening. So we have to reflect on this as well. But how well would such an approach work out? What I'm saying is that, contrary to what one might expect in the first moment, many of the decisions taken in such a way will fail, unfortunately. And this is, first of all, because it's difficult to separate good from bad risks. A lot of innovations, for example, will be here, where we find out only later, was it good for society or bad? And we may also use the wrong kind of models. So these are the errors of the third kind, while the errors of the first and second kind are basically false positive and false negatives. And that's not just a theoretical problem, it's one of the big problems of big data analytics, actually. Then there's another problem, which is the sensitivity to slight parameter changes. No matter how much data we have, we can never exactly determine the parameters. But within the variability of the confidence interval, it might happen that this variation leads to completely different results. As you can see over here, in the production problem that I've analyzed, it was one of the most modern semiconductor fabs, but they had difficulties to get the supply chain dynamics right. And there are other problems such as overfitting and spurious correlations and so on. So we need to be careful about how we're using big data. We shouldn't overestimate powers, and we need to see side effects. So the question is, can we be better than that? And I think we can be better, and we need to look into these graphs over here, which compares three curves. basically how the processing power is changing over time. Every 18 months it's doubling. How the data volume is changing over time, that's the green curve, doubling every 12 months or so. And finally, how systemic complexity is increasing as a result of new combinatorial possibilities. Now, this has a number of implications. So, we're coming from a time where we didn't have enough data to take good decisions. And that is now changing. So, with big data, we can take evidence-based decisions, and it's enabling super governments. And that is changing the character of our society and also of our economy. And we have to be very attentive of, where will we go, and are we making mistakes over here? Because there is something that is going to happen, or I believe personally is already happening, which is this explosion of complexity, which on the other hand is a motor of innovation and cultural evolution. So we don't want to stop this complexity, of course. It is a crucial part of cultural evolution. So this explosion of complexity will lead to a situation where not even this monstrous computer power and these massive data volumes will allow us to do top-down control in real time. Just not possible. Forget about it. We'll lose top-down control if we try to do that. And so the question is, what can we do? And the point is we have to go towards more autonomous systems as the level of complexity goes up in order to achieve our goals. And that means basically that in the hierarchy of our social and economic systems, we need to get to a situation where the higher levels basically step back a little bit and don't do the things that could be done well on a lower level. So that's basically the idea of a minimally invasive approach, such as in chaos control, where you step in just a few times at the right point in time and make small changes to get where you want to get. And in fact, there is a paradigm shift that I'm illustrating here for disaster response management, where you have these hierarchies of commands, and somebody tells those what they have to do, and those tell other people what they should do, towards a situation where basically government says, we need this, that, and that, and then basically the citizens and the companies would say, I can do this, and I can do that, and so on and so on. So there is a change here, and we need to recognize that in a quickly changing world, politics and business becomes increasingly similar to disaster response management. There's always a new problem popping up somehow, you fix one or two new ones. So we need to change the way of going about these problems. It requires a different management approach. So now this is not just theoretical, it's already happening. So if you see that we're going from traffic control centers to increasingly self-controlled traffic, we'll come back to this later, peer-to-peer money, like Bitcoin is on its way, peer-to-peer lending is partially replacing classical bank loans, even our peer review system is changing to become less selective. We're seeing that taxis then are replaced by Uber, and that human-supervised driving is replaced by Google self-driving cars. We come from intelligent robots to intelligent swarms, and also the military is recognizing that actually. And in fact, we're seeing maybe the best example of a self-regulating system just in front of our door, which is the Silicon Valley. So this is happening in front of our eyes, and we need to understand that. We need to have the science for it, and we can drive this process in order to prepare ourselves for this new society that's going to result from the digital revolution. That has a lot to do with the idea of Adam Smith of an invisible hand that would magically coordinate the processes around us. The idea is old, as we know, 300 years old, and unfortunately, however, it hasn't always done a good job. Financial crisis is just one example where we hoped it wouldn't happen because the invisible hand would take care of the financial system. Here are other examples. So while under normal conditions, pedestrians are organizing quite well into lanes of uniform walking direction and create efficient counterflows, and very high densities, unfortunately, control and social order can break down and creating, in this way, terrible crowd disasters. People die, although nobody wants this to happen. Or take phantom traffic jams. It shouldn't be difficult to drive in a circle. Still, traffic flow breaks down. And that's an example of the systemic instability that results from the interactions of people, and where apparently not even good education, good technology, and good intentions helps. Similar problems are actually the so-called strategy of the commons, such as environmental exploitation, overfishing, or environmental pollution. I would think that probably there are very few people who would like to destroy the planet. But the problem here is that the desirable state, cooperation between people, is unstable. So cooperation erodes in the very same way as the free traffic flow breaks down to give rise to the phantom traffic jam. And so we end up with tragedies of the commons. And the question is, how can we fix that? Now, my main point is that 300 years later, by combining complexity sciences, real-time feedback that can now be created with the Internet of Things, we can create self-regulating systems and make the invisible hand finally work. So there are now these sensor networks that are becoming available, enabling us to do real-time measurements, which is needed for real-time feedbacks, and we've been working on this, and long before Google self-driving car was reported on the press, we've been working on self-driving vehicles with Volkswagen, and have actually shown that it's possible to dissolve traffic jams by changing the interactions between cars. We call that mechanism design. And this kind of self-regulation is resource efficient and it's resilient. I'd like to illustrate that here for urban traffic flow control. So let's look at 3 different ways of doing that. Classical top-down control with a traffic center that collects all the information and tries to optimize the control and then implements that all over the city. So it's apparently a benevolent dictator approach. The problem is traffic optimization is NDR, so it cannot be strictly done in real time. Let's see how a market approach basically works, where each intersection would separately, strictly minimize travel times of all the cars approaching an intersection. So we could call that an economicus approach. Everybody just thinks of his own job and tries to do that as good as possible. So how well will this work? And then third of all, we do the same thing, but whenever a queue grows long, we'll prioritize it in order to make sure that we will not have spillover effects. So it takes care of the neighboring intersection. We could call that other regarding. Okay, so let's look at the queue length as a function of the capacity utilization of the intersection. And clearly, As the capacity utilization goes up, also the QLX goes up. So this is for top-down regulation over here, the red line. And if you look now at the Homo economicus approach, where each intersection just strictly minimizes the travel time, is much better. Now there is kind of a coordination happening by self-organization, and much more efficient as we expected from markets. However, there is a point where Adam Smith's invisible hand doesn't work anymore, because now the Q length explodes, so in this area the invisible hand fails. If we look however at this other regarding self-regulation approach, then we'll see it's much better than anything else all over the full range of capacity utilization. So surprisingly, bottom-up self-regulation can outsmart optimal top-down control if we're confronted with complex optimization problems. And we can make the invisible hand work. Now, this is creating beautiful green waves, as you can see over here, and it's very efficient for all modes of transport, and it's also good for our environment. So why don't we just do this? Now the question is, can we transfer this idea from traffic to basically anything, like our economy, production plants, supply chains, and our society? And the answer is yes, we just have to do it. Elinor Ostrom, Nobel Prize winner, has actually shown that self-governance can work and is efficient if we just have the right mechanisms in place. And in fact, one of the mechanisms that's very promising for a globalized world is this kind of reputation mechanisms that we are seeing all over the web now. So they're spreading like wildfire, and they're spreading because they're good for something. Actually, it turns out that it's good for customers because we can be more confident to get a better service if we use a seller who has a high reputation. And the seller, it turns out, can sell his products at a higher price. So it's also good for them. So why don't we just apply that to everything? There are more mechanisms, but I don't have much time here. So I will just point out that self-regulation is the approach which can master the complexity of today's world and benefit from it. And that implies a paradigm shift from such an over-regulation approach that's trying to tell people exactly what they should do, and most likely, they'll fail because that is just too complicated to handle, towards a situation where we're creating institutions that help people to take good decisions and effective actions, such a design, for example. And what does that basically mean for our economy and our society? Well, in fact, now those tools are becoming available. We can start to produce at home with 3D printers, and social media are enabling us actually to coordinate ourselves, to come up with our own projects. And so we have to take this idea further in order to create the infrastructure for this self-regulating world. And this is where future ICT comes again into play. So if we understand the relationship between structure, dynamics, and function, we can come up with these self-regulating systems. And there are a number of information communication systems that can help us to understand this. First of all, the planetary nervous system that would use sensor networks of the Internet of Things to measure the state of affairs in real time, not just of our physical and biological environment, but also of our social and economic environment. We can implement real-time feedbacks. With the innovation accelerator, we would create new mechanisms, and with a living Earth simulator and interactive virtual worlds, we could test these new mechanisms, whether they really produce what we expect them to do. And then finally, we can implement that in participatory systems and have the self-regulation go. There's much more to tell you about, so please go to the Future ICT doc, have a look at this. What kind of information communication systems we need to build to be prepared for the digital society of the future. I think we're not well prepared yet, but we have all the ingredients that we need. We now need to do that. So the global problems that we're facing are big, and they call for a joint global effort. But we can create suitable mechanisms and institutions for the digital society of the 21st century, and let's do that together. Thank you very much.
I believe this man has a vision, so I also believe that this was a discussion. So who wants to start? So is that possible, maybe? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of what you're talking about lies on measurability. I was just at an Internet of Things conference, and there's awesome stuff going on, but it's stuff that there is a consensus on what's being measured, there's a consensus on how it's measured, there's a consensus on what you can do exactly. So, a lot of things that you're talking about where none of those three things exist. Could you talk about that a little bit?
So I heard you talk about consensus many times. And the question is, do we need always...
I mean, there's a consensus on measurement. We agree.
Yeah.
Consensus on measurement. We agree there's a lot of traffic. There's not much traffic. It's flowing or not. I just mean that the sort of, we all agree on a certain reality, and we agree on how we measure that reality, and we agree on how we evaluate it. But there's a lot of things we're talking about where we don't agree on what the thing is, how to correctly measure it, or what its valuation is. So,
okay, there are two principles that I think are very important for this future world. First of all, it's diversity and pluralism. So basically, allow different communities to come up with their own sets of rules and self-regulation mechanisms, which is better than in the bigger communities, which kind of have a common framework. The other principle is evolution. So we would certainly start with measurements that are probably not agreed on, and of course we don't yet know how to measure things, but things will get better over time. And I think we need to allow competitive measurement procedures to come up, to allow finally the selection processes as they could be implemented through these reputation mechanisms to select the better ones. In fact, I think we should imagine this future information world to be a participatory information ecosystem. At the moment, we have a situation where companies are very much distributing the filters that figure out what kind of data is presented to us. And I think we'll have to turn it around and allow the users to come up with their own filters, share them with their friends and their colleagues that will modify them, and eventually they will improve. And some of these filters will be useful and others not, so there will be an evolution of these information filters and measurement procedures and so on. And in this way, we're getting towards more and more powerful information ecosystem that empowers us to do a better job.
Okay, another question?
This
What do you think is self-regulating systems which have also the possibility to regulate into wrong area? Though that all the system goes to a non-good solution, are there any protection against those converging to wrong solutions?
Well, self-regulation is not about people just choosing the rules that please them. It's about identifying a suitable rule set that will create a function that we'd like to happen through self-organization. Of course, you have to first test that to make sure that the interaction mechanism and institutional condition that you're creating is really producing that. And of course, there's always this real-time measurement feedback. You would see when the system is leaving its desired path. So from that point of view, of course, that shouldn't happen. There's another point, though, which is kind of compliance with the rules, because humans have this tendency to come up with new rules. We are innovative somehow. And so we'll have to find suitable ways of handling this. But compliance mechanisms are part of self-regulation.
All right, so let's thank all the speakers again.